How's it going, Jerry? It's great to finally get you on the podcast. It feels like we've been trying to plan this thing for probably a year at this point almost.
I don't think it's been that long, but it has been a while. Yeah, it's great to be with you here today.
Yeah, it at least feels like it. I'm really interested in hearing your background, how you got into IT, what made you want to get into that field, and just hearing that story. The reason why I start everyone off there is because, there may be some listeners that are trying to do that jump themselves. They're trying to do a career change in IT. And I feel like hearing everyone's story, lets them know that, hey, this is possible for me. If this person did it, maybe it's possible for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I guess I have one of those non-traditional entries into the IT world. I did not have a computer science degree. I had a business economics degree back at college. Did a little bit of programming work there as one or two of my courses, but then bounced around a little bit and then decided to take a programming class at a technical school. And I think it was like a 6-month program or something like that. And was fortunate to get an opportunity at a small savings bank in New Jersey that was converting from, of all things, Burroughs computing equipment onto IBM. So I was part of the new IBM-based team. And that was really my start into the IT world. And then later on, worked at Chase Bank in New York and got more focused on the security aspects of mainframe and middleware and the early web days. And, it was before we called it identity management, but later on was part of the identity management emerging market, if you will, when I joined Berkeley Group as an industry consultant and then as an analyst. And then from that, I went to the software side. Was at Axiomatics, a Sweden-based fine-grained authorization vendor for several years. And then now coming up on 3 years at Strata, identity as head of standards.
When you look back on your start, it kind of sounds like it was a right time, right place sort of situation. Is that how you look at it as well?
Absolutely. It was very fortuitous that, I decided then to do the programming class. And then, of course, that there was a local opportunity at this bank that I was able to join and really learned a lot under the tutelage of, some more senior folks there. It was really a great place for me to get started. No doubt about it. And great time.
Yeah, I'm sure, starting in that kind of environment it's like trial by fire, right? Do you find yourself enjoying those larger environments, or do you like the smaller environments?
Yeah, I'm definitely in more of a small company kind of person these days. The savings bank, while we had, I think, about 100 branches at the time, used a lot of the employees were, branch-based people. But the IT department that I worked in was fairly small. Of course, Chase Bank was a huge company. When I left, there were almost 100,000 employees. Now it's quite a bit larger than that even. And when I joined Burton Group, I think we were about 50 people and 150 or thereabouts when the company was acquired by Gartner. And then PhD with Axiomatics and now Strata, both less than 100 person companies. So yeah, I definitely like the smaller environments. There's no place to hide. Everybody really has to pull their weight. You get to do a lot of different things. So you're not just boxed into one single area. You get to work on different things, which I enjoyed that for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I feel the same. Like after being in the field for about 10 years now, I've worked at really large companies and very small companies, 30-person startup like companies. And I really appreciate the experience that I've gotten at the really small companies, because you have to wear so many hats. You're wearing customer service, you're wearing engineer, even some developer, or whatever it might be, right? Um, and the experience that you get is like invaluable. I feel like people, always think that like the only place that you could get real valuable experiences from, like, the big name tech companies like Nvidia or Facebook or whatever it might be. But I feel like there's a lot of other companies that are doing really cool things, especially now with how, the space is, where everyone can really dive into whatever they want to, right? With AI, you can easily, very cost affordably, get into AI and integrate it with your product and things like that, right? So there's a lot of room now that exists with these smaller companies that are able to do a lot more with it for you to get that experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the barriers to entry into different fields are definitely lower with a lot of the automation and AI capabilities that are out there. That can help bootstrap you in different ways. I definitely agree with that. I do, again, going back to the smaller work environments, it you can get exposed to different areas, like you were saying, and maybe ultimately you specialize in one area or another. But I think having that exposure is also valuable because it gives you a sense of a bigger picture. What does it take for a company to operate? And that's going to be super valuable, even if you go to a large company with 10,000 or 50,000 employees. Having that awareness of how the company operates and functions from a business perspective is super important, especially to us IT people, because sometimes we're disconnected from that. But also learning how different departments have to work together. And but it is a matter of scale. Can that scale up to a large organization? And maybe if they're more comfortable in that environment, or maybe not, you will realize that no, I prefer that 100 to 500 employee size company. So it gives you that level of exposure and experience that I think is super important.
Yeah, the larger companies, they have very unique problems. Like how do you build an internal application to scale, across the globe for 500,000 people, right? Like, it's internal, and you have to make sure that it's completely protected with everything, and it has people's, private information in it. That's a problem that you're not going to get at a really small company, right? And it's interesting to go back and forth between, kind of the two sizes. I haven't really seen too much in the middle. Um, but it's interesting to go back and forth between them because you see these really large problems, and then you go to the smaller environment, and it's like, oh, we need to kind of plan for this and this and this. And we need to be thinking ahead for this, um, because that's where those bigger problems down the road are really mitigated, up front. Um, when you look back on your career and the different skills that you've obtained, is there one place that you've been that you have felt has given you the most, I guess, ROI, right? The most skills, the most valuable skills, whatever it might be.
I think I would have to point back to my time as an analyst because it really helped to sharpen my writing skills. Because we're doing research reports every quarter, and you have to review them with your peers, and then it goes through a copy edit process. And let me just say that it was like getting an English comp lesson every quarter when those redlined reports came back. So I think that was invaluable in helping me to be a better writer, an adequate writer. And I think that's a universally valuable skill to have. I would say second to that is being able to become have a decent presenter, at a conference or on a webinar or what have you. But overall, it was teaching me to be more specific and precise with the language that I used, because that's what that environment was all about, was being able to put forth an analysis of a market segment or a vendor or what have you as an kind of topic, and then be able to defend that position when you're being questioned by your customers or by the audience. So that's a skill set that I really am grateful to have, been able to garner during that time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's it's really fascinating, right? I've been talking to a lot of people lately, and the idea of writing as a skill in IT keeps coming up, and it keeps on coming up as being a very valuable skill. Which is, it's interesting to me because, like me personally, I am not interested in it at all. When I'm told I have to write some document on something, I try to avoid it. But I've been on teams where we have had, a technical writer right there on the team, and they're writing down everything, that we're doing for different processes and whatnot. And they're, adding context and everything. And they create, fantastic documents, right? They're doing the stuff that none of the engineers want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. But it's coming up as, really valuable skill, which I find interesting, mostly because it's not like a traditional skill of IT, and yet people are finding that it's in higher demand or in growing demand, for them to have that on their IT team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, for me personally, it's a bit ironic because in college, what did I hate the most other than the final exams? Doing research reports.
Yeah.
Here I ended up doing it for more than 9 years as a profession. So definitely some of my professors were enjoying that moment, I'm sure, in their graves. But it is super important to be able to write, because if you need to justify a project, you want to start, you say from a customer's perspective, I want to deploy some new identity or security system. Well, you need to be able to convince the stakeholders who are going to approve that budget that this is a worthy cause. And if you can't adequately write that in a document or present that in a presentation format, then your chances of getting that project approved go down precipitously. So yeah, it's super, super important for those reasons and many others.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's becoming invaluable, honestly, especially if you're a technical person that has those skills and they're able to do it. Being able to defend, your work in a written email to an angry customer is it's a skill that you're only going to use a couple times. Hopefully, I mean, hopefully you're not making a lot of customers angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a skill that, if you have it, you're really going to shine. And I remember earlier on in my career, I was always taught, like, when you're building these cases against customers, necessarily not a case, but what the situation was where, when we're setting up the system, if a customer, misconfigures it, right, they can incur $100 charge for doing the wrong thing, for making the wrong phone call. And that's not $100 charge from us. It's $100 charge from this national agency. So it's the same thing for everyone in the country, irrespective. We're just passing on the fee. And when that's going on, and you're getting them set up, it's your job as the technical SME to identify that immediately and reach out to them and say, hey, let's avoid these, right? Because we'll cover, the first couple and whatnot, right? Because we're getting you set up and whatnot. Well, this customer, I don't know where it came from for them. They just decided we're going to test, 20, 30, 40 of these things, in one sitting within 30 minutes. And, let's see what happens. Right. And they didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay when it came due. And I wrote this, really well described email of all the phone calls I made, the timestamps, the emails I sent, the screenshots, every single thing. And the guy at my company that's actually tasked with, getting the customers to pay this fee, he came over and he said, if they send anything other than a check, I would be shocked. It's like, how can you defend any of that?
Right. Well done.
Yeah, I mean, that's a skill, that I've had to use a couple times, right? Not a lot, but it does absolutely separate you apart, because after that one experience, I had other people coming to me for input with a difficult customer email and things like that, and I'm just a young, tech guy, young app specialist. I don't know anything, right? I could probably write better than I could any technical, task or whatnot, right? So it's interesting how that played out. So, I wanted to ask you, where do you think the future of IAM is going? And the reason why I ask is because we're kind of in a limbo phase right now within IAM, I would say, right? Because we're on the cusp of IAM really changing significantly, I feel. But we're still trying to use older solutions for new problems. Where a PAM solution used to be the end all be all. You get a PAM solution, you get something that, can kind of have a self-service functionality with roles and permissions, and you're pretty set. You're pretty locked in, you're good to go. And now we're finding that doesn't really scale well with the cloud. And the cloud has so many different facets to it. IAM is so different in, each cloud, that teams are having issues keeping up, and their solutions that they've already invested millions of dollars into are not keeping up, and they're not going to keep up. So, where do you see this going? Where do you think the future is with this?
Well, there's, lots of different things happening within the identity management market. A lot of advancements have occurred recently in authentication. I think over the last several years, we've had more and more emphasis on using stronger methods of authenticating rather than just relying on passwords. We keep hearing that year X is the year that passwords go away. We've made some progress toward that. I think the latest iteration of that technology trend is now in passwordless systems. So using other technologies rather than just relying on a their network password to log in. So that's going in its own trajectory. But there, as you said, there are so many different components to an identity management infrastructure, and so many of them, as you said, that were used in the data center are not very applicable to cloud native environments. And of course, every cloud has its own method of doing identity or doing access. And within the cloud, it's up and down the stack too, right? It's the application layer, the infrastructure, the network, the data, all of these different techniques and technologies. So I guess one of the things we see being valuable in this area that has been applied elsewhere is abstraction and orchestration. If you think about where Kubernetes is today, what happened before then? You had VMware making virtualization a commodity, right? Or you get to the mass market, and that was prevalent for a period of time. And then we switched to containers, running our apps and workloads and APIs within containers. But then how do you manage a containerized environment? Due to all the complexities that you point out, if I want to run workloads across clouds, how do I do that? Or even across different regions within a single cloud platform. So that's where Kubernetes evolved, right? Kubernetes abstracts away the complexities of each cloud platform and allows you to do that orchestration, right? To manage workloads for availability, for or automatic or elastic capacity, and so on. So I think these principles more and more are being applied to identity, and I think that's a trend that will continue.
Hmm. Yeah, you talk about the different trends overall of technology, and now we have this serverless thing, right? Like it's funny because we call it serverless functions, right? But they're running on servers,
Yes,
and
ultimately they are. Yes.
yeah, and they're significantly more complex to track and monitor within the environment. Because I feel like the overarching technology evolution is growing much faster than what security solutions are keeping up with. That's why we kind of see so many new security companies, I feel, come onto the market so often, is because there will be a fringe, technology evolution in one area, like serverless. And now we have a security company that's built around how to protect it, how to monitor it, and things like that. Something that we didn't need before, but now, there's a growing need for. And, same thing with IAM, right? Like these IAM solutions, they have to grow. They have to have more visibility into the cloud. They have to be able to tie things together and monitor who's accessing what roles are accessed and used. And you have to do this, across all of the clouds, right? All at the same time, and be able to tie it together in a way that is simple for that analyst to look at and understand what's going on, right? Like there's a very short window that these analysts actually have to look at these things, right? To determine if they need to pay attention to it or not. And I always appreciate a good product that takes that into account, right? And kind of thinks that through. And you can always tell when a product thinks that through. Is that something that you also look at because of your prior experience as an analyst?
Yeah, and also comes through with my experience at a end user company. Being on that side of the table where we're concerned about uptime and availability and resiliency, for example, and wanting to make sure that a product, while it has a purpose of securing a certain aspect of the operation, will that work in my operation? Is applicable to me in my environments. And so, yeah, that definitely comes through, and we definitely think about that right now as we're looking at new features or functionality or capabilities to the Strata product set, and trying to address certain scenarios. Are we approaching this from the end user's perspective? That SOC analyst, or the CISO office, or the auditor, or whomever is the person that would be operating that functionality from the other side. Are we hitting all the notes that they are interested in? So that's absolutely part of that product planning perspective.
Yeah, it's I find it, kind of UI design, I find it to be fascinating, right? Because when I was an analyst and I was going through the different menus in our solution, there would be times where I would say, hey, these two things, they can be combined, right? Like, why do I have to go to these several different places to configure this one thing? Like this is a common use case, right? Why don't we just put this all in one place? And so I'm not going around, right? And looking at it from a process perspective, I feel like it forces you to be more customer centric, especially when you deal with bad products and products that, don't make any sense, and you have to configure the same thing in 3 or 4 more different places, just to, make sure that it's configured and acting right and all that sort of stuff. Like that sort of, you know, product, I typically hate and I try to steer away from, because I've had poor experiences with it. Right. I've had products do things that were unintended, and I thought that I had configured it, one way, and it did another thing. And I reach out to support, and they're like, "Oh, you forgot this other, you know, tucked away sub menu, that has this configuration as well." That's what it really keys off of. It's like, guys, what if it says it in one place, it should just be it. Like that should be the
Right.
solution.
Yeah,
Um,
a couple of thoughts there. I mean, even when you're using a website, for personal use and things are disorganized, or I'm entering data over here, but the click the button for accept or next is all the way in the far corner. It's just even simple usability things like that stand out to us, I guess, based on our past experiences. But also when we're thinking about product design, we have folks that really specialize in that area and they're super good at it. And we don't want to just focus on what we call the happy path. When everything works well, great. But like you were just describing, where if I get myself into a corner and something doesn't work, we want to try to steer people back or give them, that's a place to have a help, logo or something to help them get out of that corner. So you want to think of, okay, where can the user go wrong because I haven't maybe designed things perfect, and help them out of that so that they don't have to get on the phone with your support folks.
right. Yeah, always limiting how often, a customer has to call support it's a great thing. That's for sure. Any support person would say that.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of circle back to IAM, what are some emerging areas or emerging problems that you see IAM, kind of transforming or evolving into to solve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I can talk about a couple of initiatives that I'm involved with. One we started here at Strata to deal with access policy differences across that multi-cloud scenario that we talked about earlier. With each of those platforms having different ways of defining an access rule or policy, and how do you manage that? Because without some kind of policy orchestration model, you've got to have some subject matter expertise, to cover all of those areas. So we've come up with a standard way to define an access policy. You call it identity query language. And we built an open source system called Hexa that can translate to and from that ID2L standard format into the bespoke format of a cloud system. And that's a CNCF project, Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And we continue to build out that capability and show how that kind of model can work. So that's one way we're trying to help address the complexity of the cloud access systems, through again abstraction and orchestration. So that's one area. A second area that I've been involved in is now a working group at the OpenID Foundation. So those are the folks that bring you, shared signals framework and continuous access evaluation profile and OpenID Connect and such. So there's a new working group that's working on standardizing some of the interactions of fine-grained authorization systems. So there's many of them out on the marketplace. Most of them are proprietary models. Some of them are based on Open Policy Agent or the Exactable Standard or other formats. But there's not a lot of interoperability. So the authorization exchange, or Zen working group for short, is working to standardize some of those interactions between authorization systems. And we're aiming to do an interop demonstration at the Identiverse conference in late May with the first basic profile. So those are a couple of things that we're involved in here at Strata, to try to help the industry move forward in a more standardized way.
Hmm. How do you think AI is going to be impacting IAM? Will it impact IAM? How do you see that going?
Well, there's a lot of people interested in both of those projects, and a lot of focused energy on it right now. And I think with the intention in the industry around security and all of the breaches that we continue to hear about, some of that can be um, some of those kind of issues can be dealt with these two projects, but it's just a way to try to improve security overall. And there's a lot of interest out there and a lot of groundswell momentum behind them these days.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see where the space, goes in the next 5 years, right? Um, it's a fascinating time because I feel like there's a lot that we don't know of what's to come just yet, especially with that huge X factor of AI.
Wow, look how long it took us before we mentioned AI. That's pretty good, actually, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had whole podcasts about AI and
Right.
quantum cryptography and all that sort of stuff. It's a fascinating area, that's for sure. But I wonder, I just try to look at everything from the perspective of if I was starting over today, right? What's the thing that I'm trying to future proof my career against? What's the thing I'm trying to learn now that in 5 or 10 years is going to be, very valuable, right? And obviously, one of those things is AI, but AI is so broad. You really have to dial it in and figure out, what niche of AI you should be taking part in. So that's how I approach it. Is that how you look at it as well, or how do you view the industry like that?
Well, I think with any new technology that comes onto the scene, especially one that is so impactful as artificial intelligence, you really need to examine how that, number one, impacts your own career path, what's it's going to do for me or against me. And you, I would say most people should look at learning more about AI. How can it be used to help me in whatever job I have, whether I'm a developer? Look at these code generation copilots. Is that something that's going to help me become a better developer or not? Um, I think another way to look at this is, well, if I am a developer and there's all these, copilot code generators out there, find out what the limitations are. Because if you can fill in the gaps of where they have a limitation, then that's a valuable asset to be able to bring forward. If you're just a me too, I'm just a basic, I can run run of a little developer, then your value is, I think, a little bit decreased. But if you know how best to use AI in your role, then that's a value add, because as we can see, we're still in the very, very early days of it. I mean, look at, the stumbles of even the giant like Google, in their launch of Gemini recently. So that just is further evidence that we're in early days. So getting it now, learn about it, learn where the limitations are and how that evolves over time. And that's, I think, can best position you to take advantage of that where appropriate or where necessary.
Hmm. Yeah, we haven't dove into it very much yet, but you want to Could you tell us, what the problem is that Strata is solving and how you're going about solving it?
As far as with AI or just in general?
No, just in general.
Okay, sure. Well, Strata is an identity orchestration company. So when we think again back to the multi-cloud environment, if your company is adopting more than one cloud platform, then by definition, you're multi-cloud, which means you're multi-identity. What Strata enables you to do with identity orchestration is manage these different identity components, whether they're legacy and on premises or in the cloud, so that in the user journey of when a user logs on to an application environment, we can direct that user to authenticate to the right identity provider. If they need to also add a multi-factor authentication, like a passwordless or 2FA authentication, we can direct them to that source. If we need to gather up additional data points to start the session that the application needs, we can go and retrieve those. So we're in the middle of that session orchestrating what happens in order to get the right information to that application so that it can operate appropriately. So that's that abstraction that we talked about earlier. So we abstract away um, the I'm sorry, the abstract away the hard coded implementation of your apps to your identity platform, so that you can change out these identity components as the technology does advance. If you implemented an older multi-factor authentication technology, say 5 years ago, and now you want to move to passkeys or some other passwordless model, well, then we can just pull out one component and plug in the other and make that migration much easier and faster than if everything was hardwired to each application.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's really fascinating that you're approaching the problem from that angle, because I feel like that's something that you typically don't want to change very often, because it is so difficult for your developers to set up the new identity authentication process or method or whatever it might be, and you need something very lightweight to sit in there that can manage it, right? That's really the only solution. But from what you're describing, it's kind of like almost plug and play.
Well, it becomes that, right? Because if you want to change the technology without that abstraction in the middle, then you have to refactor those existing applications, to change out their authentication modules. And that's costly from a resource and time perspective. That's what our research has showed us and shown our customers. So introducing that abstraction gives you that flexibility to adapt to technology changes much faster. Because, I think historically there would be a resistance to change. Well, I just installed that system 5 years ago. I'm expecting, a 7 to 10 year lifespan out of that investment. But if technology changes faster than that, and the security threats accelerate faster than that time frame, what do? You're forced now to make an investment earlier than you wanted to, and that can be costly. But with abstraction in the middle, it's much easier to make those changes when we need to, other than forcing a specific timeline on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, unfortunately, we're at the top of our time here. I try to be very cognizant of everyone's time. Before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you if they wanted to reach out, where they can find Strata, if they wanted to learn more great information about your company.
Sure, appreciate that, Joe. Yes, you can find me via email at Gerry at strata.io, Gerry with G. And Strata's website is also strata.io. So we've got lots of great information out there. And we're typically at some of the major industry conferences around the world. European Identity Conference in Berlin coming up in June. We'll be at Identiverse in May out in Vegas. Probably at the Gartner Identity event later in the year as well. So we're usually at those major events. Stop by and say me or see some of my colleagues. And appreciate being on the show, Joe. And it's been great talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise. Well, thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode.